here. So for example, I'll be more likely to smell a freshly baked rhubarb pie if I'm hungry and enjoy the taste of rhubarb. By using factors like response criteria, signals detection theory tries to explain and predict the difference perceptual mistakes we make. A false positive is when we think we perceive a stimulus that is not there. For example, you may think you see a friend of yours on a crowded street and end up waving at a total stranger. A false negative is not perceiving a stimulus that is present. You may not notice the directions at the top of the test that instruct you not to write on the test form. In some situations, one type of error is much more serious than the other, and this importance can alter perception. In the surgeon example mentioned previously, a false negative is a more serious mistake than a false positive, although both mistakes are obviously important. And let's see a top-down process. When you use top-down processing, we perceive by filling in gaps in what is sense. For example, try to read the following sentence. I hope you meet a 5 on a test AP exam, maybe. So you should be able to read the sentence as I hope you get a 5 on the AP exam. You perceived the blank as the appropriate letters by using the context of the sentence. Top-down processing occurs when you use your background knowledge to fill in gaps in what you perceive. Our experience creates schemata, mental representation of how we expect the world to be. Our schemata influence how we perceive the world. Schemata can create a perceptual set, which is predisposition to perceiving something in a certain way. If you have ever seen images in the clouds, you have experienced top-down processing. You use your background knowledge to perceive the random shape of clouds as organized shape. In the 1970s, some parent groups were very concerned about backmasking. Suppose hidden messages musicians recorded backward in their music. These parent groups would play song lyrics backward and hear messages, usually threatening messages. Some group of parents demanded an investigation about the effect of the backmasking. What was happening? Lyrics played backward are basically random notes. However, if you expect to hear a threatening message in the random notes, you probably will much like expecting to see an image in the clouds. People who listened to the song played backward and had stigmata of this music as dangerous or evil perceived the threatening messages due to top-down processing.
I've heard of this one.
Yeah, and this is very famous one. And bottom-up processing, also called feature analysis, is the opposite of top-down processing. Instead of using our experience to perceive an object, we use only the features of the object itself to build a complete perception. We start our perception at the bottom with the individual characteristics of the image and put all those characteristics together into our final perception. Bottom-up processing can be hard to imagine because it is such an automatic process. The feature detectors in the visual cortex allow us to perceive basic pictures of objects, such as horizontal and vertical lines, curves, motion, and so on. Our mind builds the picture from the bottom up using these basic characteristics. We are constantly using both bottom-up and top-down processing as we perceive the world. Top-down processing is faster but more prone to error, while bottom-up processing takes longer but is more accurate. Yeah, these are the difference between bottom-up and top-down processing. And next one is principles of our visual perception. The rules we use for visual perception are too numerous to cover completely in this book. However, some of the basic rules are important to know and understand for the AP psychology exam. One of the first perpetual decisions our mind must make the figure-ground relationship. What part of a visual image is the figure and what part is the ground or background? Several optical illusions play with its rule. One example is the famous feature of the base, that it looks at one way is a base, but switching the figure and the ground can be perceived as two faces. Let's see here. So, like this is a kind of one base. But let's look at black color. Then there is a face. One face and the other face. This is optical illusion. So it can be looked differently. Let's look at white color and it looks like a base. And the other color, black color, it's a face. So do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, for these optical illusion, different colors, different shapes takes place.
Yes, yeah. And the other theory is Gestalt rules. At the beginning of the 20th century, a group of researchers called Gestalt psychologists described the principle that govern how we perceive groups of objects. The Gestalt psychologists point out that we normally perceive images as groups, not as isolated elements. They thought this process was innate and inevitable. Several factors influence how we will grow objects. So here it looks like a real one line, and also like one line. And proximity. So like this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and this one. And continuity and similarity. Let's see more, look at more. So proximity, this one, objects that are close together, that are more likely to be perceived as belonging in the same group. So this is proximity. And similarity, this one. Objects that are similar in appearance are more likely to be perceived as belonging in the same group. Yeah, similarity. And continuity, this one. Object that forms a continuous form are more likely to be perceived as belonging in the same group. And closure. Similar to top-down processing, objects that makes up recognizable images that are more likely to be perceived as belonging in the same group, even if the image contains gaps that the mind needs to fill in. And constancy. Every object we see changes minutely from moment to moment due to our changing angle of vision, variation in light, and so on. Our ability to maintain a constant perception of an object despite these changes is called constancy. There are several types of constancy. Number one, size constancy. Size, shape, brightness. Let's look at size is object closer to our eyes will produce bigger images on our retinas. But we take distance into account in our estimation of size. We keep a constant size in mind for an object and know that it does not grow or shrink in size, it moves closer or farther away. And shape constancy. Object views from different angles will produce different shapes on our retinas. But we know the shape of an object remains constant. For example, the top of a coffee mug viewed from a certain angle will produce an elliptical image on our retinas. But we know the top is circular due to shape constancy. Again, this depends on our familiarity with the visual shape of the object. We perceive object as being a constant color even as the light reflecting off the object changes. For example, We will perceive a brick wall as brick red even as a daily light. Phase and the actual color reflected from the wall turns gray. Use the perceived depths into two categories, monocular cues and binocular cues and monocular cues. Let me see. Monocular cues depth cues that does not depend on having two eyes, and binocular cues that depends on having two eyes. And let's look at monocular cues. If you have taken a drawing class, you have learned monocular depth cues. Artists use these cues to imply depth in their drawings. One of the most common cues is linear perspective. Sorry. And if you wanted to draw a railroad track that runs away from the viewer off into the distance, most likely you would start by drawing two lines that converge somewhere toward the top of your paper. If you added a drawing of the train, you might use the relative size cue. You would draw the boxcars closer to the viewers as larger than the engine off in the distance. A water tower blocking our view of power of the train would be seen as closer to us due to the interposition cue. Objects that block the view to other objects must be closer to us. If the train were running through a desert landscape, you might draw the rock closest to the viewer in detail, while landscape off in the distance would not be as detailed. This cue is called texture gradient. We know that we can see detail in texture close to us, but not far away. Finally, your art teacher might teach you to use shadowing in your picture. By shading part of your picture, you can imply where the light source and thus imply depth and position of object. And the other one is binocular cues. And other cues for depth result from our anatomy. We see the world with two eyes set a certain distance apart. And this picture of our anatomy gives us the ability to perceive depth. The finger trick you read about during the discussion of anatomy of the eye demonstrates the first binocular cue. Each of our eyes sees any object from a slightly different angle. The brain gets both images. It knows that if the object is far away, the images will be similar, but the closer the object is, the more disparity there will be between the images coming from each eye. The other binocular cue is convergence. As an object gets closer to our face, our eyes must move toward each other to keep focused on the object. The brain receives feedback from the muscles controlling eye movement and knows that the more the eyes converge, the closer the object must be. And next one is effects of culture on perception. One area of psychology cross-cultural researchers are investigating is the effect of culture on perception. Research indicates that some of the perceptual rules psychologists once thought were innate are actually learned. For example, cultures that do not use monocular depth cues in their art do not see depth in pictures using these cues. Also, some optical illusions are not perceived the same way by people from different cultures. For example, below is a representation of the famous Mueller-Lyer illusion. Which of the following straight line A or B appears longer to you? So actually looks like a line. Which line do you think like more longer to you?
I think it's A.
Yeah. But actually the length of line A and line B is same. Yeah.
Oh.
But it looks like the line A, it looks like it appears longer.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. This is a kind of like effects of culture on perception. So line A should look longer. Yeah, should look longer. Even though both lines are actually the same length. People who come from non-carpenter cultures that does not use right angles and corners, often in their building and architecture, are not usually fooled by the Mueller linear illusion. Yeah, this is kind of illusion. So cross-cultural research demonstrate that some basic perceptual sets are learned from our culture. And last one is extrasensory perception. Now you've reviewed the senses and how the brain changes this sensation into perception. You can interpret the term extrasensory perception, ESP, in a more specific way than most people can. Someone claiming to have extrasensory perception is claiming to perceive a sensation outside the sense discussed in this chapter. Psychologists are skeptical of ESP claims primarily because our senses are well understood and researchers do not find reliable evidence that we can perceive sensations other than through our sight, smell, hearing, taste, touch, and vestibular systems. Researchers who test ESP claims using rigorous experiments such as double-blind studies find other, more likely explanations for supposed extrasensory phenomena. Usually, ESP claims are better explained by such things as deception, magic tricks, or coincidence. So, this is the things that we done up to now. And then, let me see. Do you have any question about today's lecture?